everyone. Hello. Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate you being here. I think we'll start this Wednesday Wisdom Live with a few deep breaths. I know I need some. It's only Wednesday and it feels like it could already be Saturday. Any of you relate? I can't see you, so wave or comment. You know I really want to hear from you, as I've told you before. And this is an interactive forum. It's an extension of Every Soul Has a Story, which I started back in 2017. Just gonna get some water. Give me a moment. I'm so glad you're all here. Grab water. It's happy hour time. Grab a glass of wine, grab a tea, whatever suits your fancy, and let's get started. So I changed the time. Obviously, if any of you have been with me for the last several months, Wednesday Wisdom was at noon, and I decided to change the time because I saw less and less people were coming on. I think as our country gets back to some semblance of normalcy, it seems that more and more people are going back to work, going back to their offices, whether at home, whether you're teaching. So I wanted to be mindful of everyone's needs and see if perhaps meeting at 5 o'clock was better for everyone. Either way, I always record our conversation. Such a funny word, right? Can we start there? One of my mottos and messages with Every Soul Has a Story is to join the conversation, but it's awfully strange talking to my iPad here and to my phone here because I'm on Instagram and Facebook. I can't see you, and it's a very strange dynamic. So as I do every week, I encourage you to please jump in. I'd appreciate your feedback. I'd love for you to comment and share and jump on in and engage, because this is Every Soul Has a Story. It is not Dara's Soul. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. On Instagram, I just had a little snafu. Okay, we're back. Anyway, so thank you for being here. And I was going to call this a happy hour and crack open a bottle of wine. Some of you like vodka, some of you just like water, some of you like tea. Thanks for letting me know you all are here. But you know, happy hour doesn't feel right for today's subject. Quite frankly, it almost feels insensitive. It doesn't feel right to me. So I'm going with my gut, and if you'd like to grab a glass of wine or whatever, or a glass of tea, cup of tea rather, please do so. Get comfortable. What I'd like to talk about today, for those of you that saw my Wednesday Wisdom post, I always put something on Facebook and Instagram every Wednesday, which is kind of a launching point for us. It is a way of setting our intention about a topic matter and more. And I wrote today, I really deliberated, and I was really thinking deeply and pondering what to write today. I had so much going through my mind. I couldn't sleep a lot this week because I couldn't wait to connect with you again today, to be real honest with you. I was up last night just buzzing with all kinds of thoughts and feelings and emotions. So what came to me is this: peaceful progress. That's what I wrote this morning. That is the topic for today's Wednesday Wisdom. And I feel that kind of encompasses peaceful protests that are occurring and more. So let me start by reading a quote that really resonated. It's by Eleanor Roosevelt, who I've always loved. And ironically, you know, I love thinking about words and processing words and writing, and I thought right before we got on and joined each other today, that her initials are ER. So what's weird about that? I'm thinking about our pandemic, and I'm also thinking about the pandemic of racism. Sadly, a pandemic that is not new. And so I want to recap what we spoke about last week. Last week's topic and intention was we can fill in the blank, right? And you were all so wonderful showing up for yourselves by showing up here in this safe space to connect and discuss this. So we talked about what can we do? And what we talked about was unite, learn, educate, kids and adults alike, create, connect, and above all, make a change. So that's what we talked about last week. I also read some excerpts of a dear friend of mine's piece, Gregory Hale. He is the president of Broward College and an extraordinary human being. I was so touched by his words. Today I'll share some other words with you, some of which are my own, many of which, but I'm finding that I'm so inspired and learning hourly from so many different people, some that are strangers that have become friends, some that I'll never meet, and some that are dear friends. So what I want to focus on today is changing the narrative, right? So last week we had a really tough conversation, and those conversations really need to continue. We need to have the tough conversations. We need to be brave. We need to be bold, or change will never happen. And in my opinion, quite frankly, that is not acceptable. That is not okay. We can do better. We must do better. So let's start today with a quote, like I said, by Eleanor Roosevelt. And why did it seem so ironic to me that her initials are ER? Because I think this is a national emergency. It's a global emergency. And there's urgency in this emergency. So I just found it a bit ironic that this is one of the messages that I felt very drawn to and guided to share with you today. So here's what she says. For it isn't enough to talk about peace. One must believe in it. And it isn't enough to believe in it. One must work at it. I want you to sit with that. Very profound statement many, many years ago. Really resonated for what we are experiencing the last few weeks, and again, the last, unfortunately, few centuries. So I wanted to start with that quote. Any of you that have joined, and I'll say this throughout our time together, I always record this now. You can find these segments and episodes on Facebook, Instagram, and on my YouTube channel, which is Every Soul Has a Story, along with my nature meditation videos and much more. So let's start with that quote. Wow, that just, right there, boom. What a wise woman, and how incredibly applicable is that to what we are experiencing. I want to, when I said earlier about changing the narrative, I want to focus on the good, because there's a lot of good that's happening. I'm seeing more and more of it. I hope you are. It seems to me, at least from my, angle or perception, and we all see through a different lens, of course, that some of the violence is subsiding a bit, right? And the peace is increasing. And what I mean by peace, we're not an inner peace. I'm certainly not. My heart's in turmoil over what's going on. And what I mean is I'm observing, I'm reading, I'm seeing a lot more kindness, more love. And we can affect change that way as well. As I referenced last week, I have such compassion. I am probably one of the biggest pacifists you'll ever know or meet or engage with. And when I say compassion, for years, people have peacefully protested. They've written Maya Angelou, Langston Hughes, Toni Morrison, you name it. Some of my favorite inspirations, authors, writers, since I was a little girl. And where compassion comes in on so many levels is, what is one to do when one is not being heard? And our Black community has not been heard. I've talked to a lot of my friends in the community, fellow writers, dear friends from childhood. I've just been reaching out to lots of different people. And I really wanted to get a pulse on not just my perspective and what I'm feeling and observing and sort of integrating, but I really wanted also to hear from people that I know can have these conversations. And that's what this is about. We need to have conversation. We need to keep this up. This shouldn't just be a hashtag Black Lives Matter. I'm glad it's starting that way, but I feel very strongly that we're in the middle of a movement, my friends, and we need to keep the momentum of the movement going. It is so important. And I've also heard some debate. This is a touchy subject, but I'm going to go there. I've heard some people complain, why is it Black Lives Matter? Why isn't all lives matter? So I inquired. I've asked some people. I've had some tough talks, like I said, with some friends of mine. And it makes a lot of sense why. So I saw this analogy. I wish I knew the author, because I always attribute whomever I can if it's not my own work. And I don't believe there is a name, but there was an analogy somebody wrote about with, for instance, the Boston Marathon, or 9/11 is another example, where hashtag Boston Strong, right? Or stand together. I mean, we can go on and on, right? With all of the different hashtags and movements and support through social media. And I'm seeing a lot of dissent and hearing people talk about, why is it only Black Lives Matter? So I've been inquiring, because I did wonder that myself, because I think all lives matter. Whether you're Muslim, Jewish, Black, Chinese, lesbian, gay, straight, I can go on and on. To me, we are one, and that's the space I live in. And what I learned was, like the Boston Marathon, like 9/11, like many, many, many other crises, pandemics, socially, physically, and more that we have experienced in our humanity, is the reason for hashtag Black Lives Matter is because when a population or a group of people or people that are hurting, and again, I'm just trying to find the right words, but when any group or individual, for that matter, needs our support as a collective, as a society, that is the intention of Black Lives Matter, that as white people or anyone who isn't, we need to step it up. We need to support our Black friends and neighbors and community. And speaking of which, I was so blessed to I had an incredible conversation with an artist who is he is extraordinary. His name is Say Adams. I posted today, I don't know if you all saw it, a few clips from our conversation yesterday. He was so gracious and kind. He's living in Manhattan in New York City, and he's been quarantined for weeks. I interviewed him last month for our podcast, which I'm releasing that episode next week. And it didn't feel right to release it yet. So I reached out to him a couple days ago, and I said, Say, can we connect? Because what we talked about last month, what's transpired in the last 30 days is like 30 years. And it just doesn't feel right in my heart to release what we talked about because it feels incomplete. So he got it right away, thankfully. I'm so grateful. And we got on a Zoom call. And again, if you have some time later, love if you check it out. You can listen to the full podcast next week. What we talked about is, I said to him, I want your perspective. I want to learn. I want to grow. What can I do as a writer? What can I do as a white woman? How can I support you? He's a Black American artist. And one of the first questions I asked him, I said, do you identify, does that go through your mind, or are you an artist first? And we had such an amazing conversation. He is a beautiful soul, extraordinarily talented. He's worked with LL Cool J and the Beastie Boys, has designed album covers for over 25 years and done so much more. Now he does these huge mural projects. And what word does he use? Love. So he, I'm I'm sorry, let me move this mic a bit, because there we go. I can't see you. Oh, I can. So he was amazing. We spoke for about 20, 30 minutes, and I wanted an update. I said, what's the pulse in the city in New York? How does it feel? Are you still quarantined? Are you joining in these peaceful protests? And he said something that, like, it rocked my world. First of all, he said, Dara, I've been protesting my whole life. And I just sat with that, and wow. And yes, like, it was like an aha moment for me, but also like a duh. This isn't new. What's that? And that breaks my heart. He has a son who's in his 30s, also an artist. And I said, what's it like? What are your conversations like? He said, I believe in humanity. He said, I believe we can do better. He said, and then he leans over and grabs his wallet. And I'm thinking, what's he doing? He said, Dara, I never leave my house without this. And I'm thinking, well, me either, right? You know, you're driving, you have your license, your credit card, I don't know. That's not where he was going with it. Similar to what I read last week, and if you didn't see it, I'd encourage you to please watch it, because this is a follow-up to last week. Greg wrote about, as well, jogging in his neighborhood and being a black man being stopped. So what Say was explaining to me, and this just broke my heart, and it's his reality. It's so many people's realities, and it shouldn't be this way. He said, I can't leave my house without my wallet, because if I get stopped, you know, I got to prove who I am, that I'm a good guy, and I'm paraphrasing. And oh my gosh, that's just abominable. And so I keep hearing people say, God, it's 2020. Can you believe this is still happening? Yeah, it is still happening, guys and gals. And it's not okay. It ought not be happening. It's crazy. So we've got the COVID pandemic, and we have this pandemic of racism. And like Say said on our brief chat yesterday, and you'll hear more if you listen to the podcast next week, you know, he said, like, I was just telling my husband this too, everyone's emotions, obviously and understandably, and this is where I was talking about compassion earlier, are so heightened, whether, you know, we're going through fear of losing a job, losing a loved one with this pandemic, protecting our families. There's so many, you know, tidal waves of emotions that are coming and going like the ocean, and it just, so Say said something really insightful amongst many other things he shared, and he was so open, and I'm so grateful. Say, I hope you're on today. I don't know if you are. He really went there with me, and he said, you know, it's almost a shame this is happening during the pandemic. And I think what he was saying, which I've had the same thought, is you know, this can't get washed out by COVID. This is so important. This must be addressed. And he also said he's hopeful. And I was so grateful to hear that, because I have the same thought, and that's what today is about, is peaceful progress. That's today's message. That is today's Wednesday Wisdom. That's what I wrote about this morning, and I'll continue to write for tomorrow's blog. And I thought about this, and he said he's hopeful because young people are coming out finally, and they're being loud. And they have to be. Like I said last week, you know, if you're not being heard in a quiet, more passive, peaceful way, you have to amplify your voice, right? It just makes sense. Now, that said, I don't condone violence. I don't understand the looting. I do understand the emotion behind it. And I'm so grateful to see it seems to be going from a boil to a simmer. Thank goodness. But I encourage, we need to get together, all of us. This shouldn't, again, this can't just be a hashtag. This has got to be a collective movement. And I want you to think about the word movement, right? If you break it down, it's movement. We have to keep moving, guys and gals. We got to keep moving. Our Black community needs us, and we need to be there for them and show up for them and stand up for them and stand next to them and by them. I feel so strongly about this, clearly. So we were talking about Eleanor Roosevelt's quote, and something else that came across my feed, which many of you I think have probably posted or read, and I chose not to post it intentionally because I wanted to read it to you. So this fabulous woman, I don't know her, I never heard of her before, Leslie Dwight, she wrote something so powerful, and why it so resonated for me is this. I have been having these conversations with friends, with my family over and over since January 1st, that this is the year where my vision will be clear. And when I wrote my message, my January 1st New Year's Day blog message, I wrote about not calling this a resolution, but rather an intention. So my intentions for this year were all kinds of things. Change, clarity, creativity, and a catapult of transformation. And that has definitely happened. I'm super grateful for that. So when I read her words, it was like, oh my gosh, is this woman in my head? It was like, so I'd like to read this to you. Again, most of you, if not all of you, have possibly read it, seen it. So I'm not looking to overuse this, but I want to draw it back to our conversation today, which is peaceful progress. And it's amazing how at different times in our lives, and this is what I love about the arts, whether it's visual art, music, words, writing. I call myself an artist, certainly not visual. Like I told Say on our interview, I can't even draw a stick figure, and I'm not exaggerating. Anyone that knows me can't even cut a straight line with a ruler. We all have our fortes and our weaknesses and strengths, right? So let me read this to you, and I'd like to put a different lens on this and why it's so resonated for me and with me, and I hope it does for you too. What if 2020 is the year we've been waiting for? A year so uncomfortable, so painful, so scary, so raw, that it finally forces us to grow. The poem reads, a year that screams so loud, finally awakening us from our ignorant slumber. A year we finally accept the need for change, declare change, work for change, become the change. A year we finally band together instead of pushing each other further apart. 2020 isn't canceled, but rather the most important year of them all. So Leslie Dwight's words so resonated with me. I have been thinking about this, quite frankly, since December 2019. And when I wrote what I did on January 1st and published, it was very similar to what she wrote. And I'm thinking we're in June. My gosh, we're in June. And her words are so true on so many levels. I hope you connect with this in some way as I did. And interesting, as is always the case, there's people that agree with words and messages and, music, and people that don't. And that's okay. That's what interpretation's about. That's why we have freedom of speech, which I'm a big believer in and a big proponent of. I'm sure you're not surprised. So for, like I started our conversation today with the Eleanor Roosevelt quote, it's just not enough just to talk about this, right? We have to believe in it. And undoubtedly, we will grow from this time. And growth is uncomfortable. That's what I talked about last week also. Growth is uncomfortable. It can be painful. It can be excruciating. But growth is necessary. And we must grow. And I believe strongly we are in this, like I said, a movement of this huge transformation. And I believe even people that don't want to grow or that haven't done the work might be forced to take a look in the mirror to, we all have free will. It's up to us what we choose to do with what we see and what we choose to not see. Will we awaken or will we ignore? But I believe, as I've written about for years, that when we get these nudges, these whispers, they will get louder and louder and louder. Just like music, the decibel goes louder and louder, right? You turn up the volume. Well, that's what's happening. And my belief in our society, when people haven't been heard, they need to turn up the volume. And I have such compassion. And you know what? I have so much empathy. And I encourage you, when we're having these raw moments, and inflamed. I feel like our nation is inflamed. It's like this one big like blister that's on the verge, if not starting to, I see it's like seeping out. That's the image I see in my mind. And we need to help heal that blister, that wound, that boil. And it's awfully hard that we're having all of this happen at once, but I don't believe it's an accident. I believe it serves a higher purpose. And if we choose, and I hope, I implore you, that if you choose to learn more, if you grew up in a family with this gets me so upset, I get tongue-tied. Let me try this again. Multi-generational racism or other beliefs that, whether it's bigotry, whether it's any kind of belief system, you have an opportunity right now, right here, in this moment, to change that. You can. I believe in you. I know you can. You need to believe it first. And so it's really easy, like I said, to put these little posts up and hashtags, but are you going to walk the walk? Will you talk the talk? Will you do the right thing when nobody's looking? And often doing what's right is not what's easy. And this applies to so many areas of our life. I tell my kids that all the time. They know one of my mommy mottos is, integrity. You have to be able to look at yourself in the mirror every morning and every night. So it's not just about people seeing you and, people can create whoever they want to be, which is very frustrating, and that's for another conversation, all these facades. But, it occurred to me also today, we're wearing these masks, but how ironic, because I think also during our pandemic, both the pandemic of COVID and this heart-wrenchingly upsetting, unbelievable pandemic of racism that has never been solved. It just kind of buries its ugly head and then rises. And I'm glad it's rising. It needs to rise. It needs to rise strongly. It needs to be louder, because we have got to continue this movement. And I believe, which I think the mask is a metaphor, how ironic that we are wearing masks, right? I don't think that where we are, both metaphorically, figuratively, and literally with the mask, we can't hide anymore. And I'm so grateful for that. So when I say peaceful progress, I'm grateful. For instance, Sesame Street and CNN, I don't know if anyone saw it. Oh, it was amazing. First of all, how cool that Maria and Gordon were on there. I know I just dated myself. I turned 46 last week. It was so neat to see old and new faces, but most importantly, there was a dialogue, there was conversation, and it was from such a place of love, and it was honest, and there were kids asking questions. And if you didn't see it, I really encourage you, pull that up on YouTube or wherever. It was phenomenal, and that gave me hope. Just like Say Adams, when we spoke on our Zoom call yesterday, he said it gives him hope. Young people are getting out there, and we need that. But even us older people, 40s and up, or whatever you consider yourself old, I'm grateful for every year. We need to speak up too. Let's join the young people. We need to truly come together. I love the Beatles. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if I was born in the wrong decade. I wonder often, actually. But there's a reason, right? There's a revolution happening, so it's okay to listen also. Learn and listen. If your mouths are going and speaking ugly things and yelling at people, and how can you listen and process simultaneously? You can't. So I encourage you to listen. I'm seeing police officers kneeling. I'm seeing them hug protesters. There is a lot of good in the world. There is. And I believe there's more to come. But I believe also in peaceful progress. And again, that's something that has been resonating, that phrase, over and over. I haven't seen it anywhere. It's just something I came up with. You can run with it, and please comment. So jump in. I see a lot of you are on here. I appreciate you being here. Like I said before, I always record our Wednesday Wisdom podcast now, because I know some people can't come on at certain times. So you can always watch it later and comment and engage even when we are done. I would love that. And I encourage that. And that's the purpose of Every Soul Has a Story. And every soul has a story, every single one, and every soul matters. And I really want to foster a nurturing, loving, connective space through my writing and through our conversations. So I need you to help me with that. So I need to hear from you. I just saw something. Let's see. Crazy Cat Mama. She said she just read NASCAR is banning Confederate flags at all of the races. About time. Oh, that's awesome. Love. Anyone else? Give me, what else have you observed, everyone? What good news have you seen? And I'll also encourage you to really be mindful of what you allow visually and auditorily into your world. And what I mean is, you can choose what you watch and read, right? So just like garbage, we take it out of the house, right? We don't bring it in. And that looks different for everybody, so I'm not judging. We all have our threshold. We all have different lenses through which we see the world. That's normal. That's human, right? So on social media, for instance, there's good news channels. There's so many wonderful things you can see. And I really encourage you to broaden your horizons. You know, this is not a space where I discuss politics. I'm not talking about Republican, Democrat, although I'm encouraging you to vote. That is one peaceful way you can affect change, right? And use your voice for good. Teach your children. Those of you that have kids, tell them a difficult story from your childhood. Be honest, be vulnerable, be real. That's what Every Soul Has a Story is about. That's what I'm about. And that's what us coming together is about. And I want to thank you so much for showing up here today, for being here, for taking time. I know that we're all busy, and I value you. I appreciate you. And I encourage you to continue the peaceful progress. If you haven't subscribed, I'd appreciate if you could go to daralevan.com. I've been sending weekly inspirational emails and blogs, and now a lot more actually, every week. I'm sending one out in the morning. And I'm also including some of our conversations now because I really want, just like I feel we all matter, I really want, and a lifelong intention of mine is that people have access to Every Soul Has a Story, visually, auditorily, through the written word, whether somebody might have a challenge with a learning difficulty or perhaps is blind. I'm making this a multi-modality movement. So join me, and I really thank you for being here, and I wish you a peaceful week ahead. From my heart to yours, sending you love. Take care.